Hi students, hope all of you are fine. Okay, so today we will start off with chapter 8, which is on radioactivity. So today the first topic is on 8.1, discovery of radioactivity. So we'll first look at the history of radioactivity. So Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen in 1895 discovered X-ray accidentally. So how did this happen? Okay, so basically he had a discharge tube, okay, which was kept in a black box, all right, a thick black box wrapped, okay, and he was working in a dark room, and apparently a paper plate that covered one side of the box, okay, all right, became fluorescent, right, and even when it was as far as 2 meters from the discharge tube. So he did subsequent experiments, okay, and what he did was he used his wife's hand in the path of the rays over a photographic plate, and he observed a development of the image of his wife's hand on the plate, okay, which showed the shadows thrown by the bones of the hand, okay, and this came to the discovery of X-ray, okay, and he's a Nobel Prize winner, okay, in the field of physics in 1901 for his X-ray discovery. Right. Then in year 1896, Antoine Henri Becquerel, a French physicist, was the first person to discover evidence of radioactivity. Okay, so basically what happened was he found this radioactive compound, uranium, okay, and unintentionally produced rays that can blacken a photographic plate even in the dark. Okay, all right. So the emission was also detected based on the ionization feature, and for this, Becquerel was awarded Nobel Prize in 1903 for discovering radioactivity. Okay, so the next advancement in radioactivity was by Marie Curie. Okay, right. So Marie Curie discovered gamma rays, which is emitted from radium. Okay, so later it was a very useful discovery because it was used in various fields, including medical field to treat cancer diseases. Right, and in 1897, Marie and Pierre Curie, a couple from Poland, discovered the emission of radioactive from ionization, okay, but not photography. So from the discovery from Professor Becquerel of uranium, Marie and Pierre had successfully discovered two radioactive elements, which are polonium and radium. Now let us look at what is radioactivity. So the definition for radioactivity. Radioactivity is the process of random and spontaneous decomposition of an unstable nucleus by emitting radioactive radiations to achieve a more stable condition. Okay, so what is meant by random? Random means it's impossible for us to predict the decay of the individual atoms. Okay, and spontaneous means it can occur naturally under certain conditions. Okay, all right, so that is the meaning of random and spontaneous. So the three types of radiations emitted is alpha particles, beta particles, and gamma rays. All right, now let us see how these radioactive radiations are produced. Right, so there are three types of radiations: alpha particle, beta particle, and gamma ray. Okay, so how is this alpha particle released? Okay, now when uranium decays into thorium, okay, during this process it releases 2 protons and 2 neutrons. So these 2 protons and 2 neutrons are known as helium nucleus, or it is also known as the alpha particle, And this is the radiation which is actually produced, right? So that is why you see 92 protons becomes 90 protons, and 146 neutron becomes 144 neutrons, right? So a decrease of 2 protons and 2 neutrons here. Okay, so this is what we call as a process of decay, right, of uranium to thorium. Okay, the next radioactive radiation is the beta particle. So here, basically what happens is, right, the thorium has decayed into protactinium-234. So during this process, what happens is, one neutron in thorium, okay, changes to become a proton and an electron. All right. So this electron which is released is a highly charged electron, and this is what we call as the beta particle. So thorium has become protactinium, right? And this protactinium has an additional proton and less one neutron, because the neutron has changed into electron. And lastly, we are going to look at the release of gamma ray. Okay, so this is cobalt-60, all right, which is unstable. When the unstable nucleus of the cobalt becomes more stable, it releases a radiation, the gamma ray. Okay. Okay, so the next part here, radioactive decomposition. So what is meant by radioactive decomposition or radioactive decay? Okay, now radioactive decay is a random and spontaneous process where an unstable nucleus emits one or more types of radioactive radiations until the nucleus becomes more stable. So that is what we saw just now. Those uranium, thorium, okay, and cobalt, these are all unstable. Okay, so they try to become more stable. So during this process is where they release these radioactive rays. So examples of radioactive elements which have unstable nuclei, okay, is carbon-14, thorium, radon, and uranium. Okay, so let's move on. Let's look at the unit of radioactivity. Now the first unit of measurement for radioactive is Curie, okay, or represented with Ci. Okay, so the rate of decay of an unstable nucleus is measured in Curie. So 1 Curie equals to 3.7 times 10 to the power of 10 decays. Okay, and the unit, SI unit for radioactivity is becquerel. So 1 becquerel equals to 1 decay per second. Okay, half-life radioactive decay, half-life of radioactive decay. So what is meant by that? Half-life is the period of time taken for half of the total number of nuclei to decay. Okay, right? So here, what you see here is an undecayed nuclei. Okay, so when it decays into half, okay, it takes 5 days, right? Okay, then for this half to become another half, it takes 10 days. And for this half to become another half, it takes 15 days. So this is what we call as the first half-life, the second half-life, and the third half-life. Okay, now we shall look at calculations involving half-life. So let us look at the first example. Protactinium-234 decays to uranium-234 with half-life of 5.2 hours. Calculate the mass of protactinium-234 after 20.8 hours with its original mass of 80 grams. Okay, so it started with 80 grams, 0 hours, 80 grams. One half-life is 5.2 hours. Okay, so it takes 5.2 hours for this 80 to become half, which is 40. Okay, now for this 40 to become half, it takes another 5.2 hours. So when you add up 5.2 hours, it becomes 10.4 hours. For 20 to become 10, another 5.2 hours. So 10.4 add with 5.2, you get 15.6 hours. And 10 to become 5, another 5.2 hours, which you add up here will become 20.8 hours. Okay, so the remaining mass after 20.8 hours is 5 grams. Clear? Alright. Now, how do we determine half-life using a graph? Okay, so this is a graph of activity against time for radioactive substance. Okay, so what you can see here is the original activity was 800. So for this 800 to become half is 400. Okay, so look at the corresponding time. From 400, you can see that the corresponding time is 40 seconds. So this means the half-life of this P is 40 seconds. Okay, it's quite easy to determine using a graph, right? Now let's just view a video for a better understanding on this calculation.
In today's video, we're going to look at the terms activity and half-life, and see how we can calculate each of them. We've already seen that some materials contain unstable isotopes, and that in order to become more stable, they can decay by emitting some form of radiation, like an alpha particle, a beta particle, or gamma rays. We call materials like this radioactive, and they come in loads of different forms. If we were to consider a single radioactive isotope, we'd have absolutely no way of knowing when it would decay, because the decay process is completely random. However, if we have a large enough sample of radioactive isotopes, then even though we couldn't tell when any individual isotope would decay, we can still find out two very useful things. One is the activity of the sample, which is the overall rate of decay of all the isotopes in our sample. And we measure activity in becquerels, where 1 becquerel represents 1 decay per second. So if a sample had an activity of 600 becquerels, then there must be 600 isotopes decaying each second in that sample. The other important term to know is half-life, which has two definitions, and can be defined either as the time taken for the number of radioactive nuclei in a sample to half, for example to drop from 1,000,000 unstable nuclei to only 500,000, or the time taken for the number of decays, so the activity, to half. For example, to drop from 600 decays per second to 300 decays per second. To properly understand these concepts, let's imagine our radioactive sample as 100 unstable isotopes, each of which can decay by emitting radiation in order to become stable. So if we watch this sample decay, the first thing we notice is that the decay process is completely random. So we have no way of knowing when any particular particle will decay. As time goes on though, and more of them decay, the number of unstable particles remaining decreases. Because there are fewer particles left to decay, this means that the overall rate of decay, which remember is the activity, will also decrease. Which is why it looks like the sample is decaying more slowly than it was at the start. This is why we can define half-life as a halving of either the number of radioactive nuclei remaining, or a halving of the activity. They are both perfectly correlated, because fewer radioactive nuclei means a lower activity. Another way to show this decay process is by using a graph that plots activity in becquerels against time. As time goes on, the number of particles remaining and the activity of the sample will decline. But the rate of decline will also fall, which is why it's curved rather than a straight line. To calculate the half-life from a graph like this, we need to find the time it takes for the activity to halve. So in this case, drop from 600 to 300, which we can see is about 2 hours. And to confirm this, we could check another one by seeing how long it takes it to halve again down to 150. And indeed, it does take another 2 hours, so we can be confident that the half-life is 2 hours. If we had a different radioactive sample though, like this one, we can see that it's decaying much more quickly. This means that it started with a much higher activity, as we can see on our graph, and also that it will decline much more rapidly, and so a much shorter half-life, this time of 1 hour. Now, so far, we've just kind of assumed that we'd know what the activity is. In real life, though, we'd have to find the activity using a device called a Geiger-Müller tube encounter. These things record all the decays that reach them each second. So, all of those alpha and beta particles and gamma rays, which it then records as the count rate. And it's this count rate that we use to estimate the activity. Before we finish, let's try one quick question. The half-life of a radioactive source is 40 hours. There are initially 3 million radioactive nuclei in the sample. How many nuclei will remain after 5 days? In a question like this, the idea is to first find out how many half-lives there'll be, and then half the number of radioactive nuclei that many times. So first, we need to take 5 days and times it by 24 hours to get 120 hours. And we can then divide that by 40, which is the source's half-life, to find out that the sample will have undergone 3 half-lives. So then we just take our 3 million radioactive nuclei and half them 3 times to get 1.5 million, 750,000, and finally 375,000, which would be our final answer. That's all for this video, so hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon.
So, okay students, I hope you have understood the lesson today. Till we meet again in the next lesson. Take care all of you. Bye.